How's it going, PengPirates Crew? It's your boy Adrian, and we're back with another video. So today's video is just going to be recapping all of the regionals that happened within the last 2 weeks. For those of you that don't know, Online Regional Wave 1 just ended. So for the last 2 weeks, there have been 5 regionals, and we're going to talk about what the winning lists were, what did top 16 look like in all of these regionals, and just what the meta can shape up to be like in the future, right? Because we still have online treasure cups coming in May and April, and there's also the offline regional events that are going to be happening throughout the same period. I also just wanted to personally congratulate Alan and Rob from our locals. These are two great guys. Alan hit top 6 and then top 5 at the Top Cut regionals with Luffy, which is super cool, and Rob hit top 16 with a kid deck that he's been playing with since OP1. So really cool that we know these guys and that they come to locals often. And we're going to be talking about their decks later on in like our meta overview videos, so that's going to be awesome. But with that being said, let's get right into what top 16 looked like in all of these regional tournaments. So what I did is I just compiled, all top 5 or top 16 regional placements for all of the 5 regionals. And I think the most surprising thing looking at this list is Whitebeard is on top. Going into these regionals and just going into OP2 in general, the consensus was that Zoro is going to be the deck to play. It's going to be the most consistent thing you're going to see. And it definitely had the most representation in terms of just people playing it. But Whitebeard just came out, and especially at the Top Cut regionals last week or this weekend, Newgate just completely dominated like top 64. I don't know the exact stat, but like top 64 was almost a third Edward Newgate. So it's pretty crazy how much Whitebeard representation there is. And also on top of that, most of the Whitebeard tops, and I think all of the tops from the Top Cut regional, they were all Strawbeard. So they were not running Moby Dick. They were running some like rush version of Strawbeard. Some of them were running like this hybrid version where you run like Atmos, King Do, and Marco Blocker that we were seeing, but like most of them were just a lot of Strawbeard, a lot of Straw Hat characters within their decks. And then of course you have Zoro coming right after that, followed by Kinemon, and then the amount of representation kind of drops here. So our meta is pretty much just Whitebeard, Zoro, and Kinemon. I would say these are probably like our tier 1 decks, to be honest, and then everything afterwards is kind of tier 2-ish, kind of a little bit competitive. You have Law, which is no surprise there. Law is an amazing deck still, really good deck to pilot. It's just really difficult, or not, it's a little bit harder to play into Whitebeard because, Law is like king of the 5k swings, and you can't really get those 5k swings off when your opponent is always at 6k. And then also there was a little bit of Smoker representation. I honestly don't think Smoker had the chance to shine just because of how much Zoro was in the format. From my friends that were playing, they pretty much said that like almost half of their games were just Zoro players. So Smoker is going to have such a hard time into that Zoro matchup just because of how fast the deck is, how much recursion there is, and Black can't really do its thing and like remove things off the board because everything is so cheap and they just like keep going and keep cycling. And then also we have our 3 Luffy placements. Again, this is 2 people because Alan took up 2 spots. But Luffy makes sense to me, honestly. It's something that people weren't expecting, but because of how much Zoro there is, it actually makes a lot of sense because if you're going to be running mirror matches of red, it's better to play Luffy instead of Zoro because Luffy, you could be more controlling. A lot of the lists, they run Mask Deuce as well, just so you could like pop more things on the board. And it lets you play more of a mid-range style red deck while still having the means and like answers that red has. You still have all the removal, you still have access to 9-cost Whitebeard, you still have full access to unblockable Luffy. It's just a crazy deck to play, and it's really good into these Zoro mirrors. It's also surprisingly really good into the Whitebeard matchup because you could always attach 1 Dawn onto your leader for free no matter what your play is, and it kind of negates the fact that Whitebeard is at 6k, right? Because now your leader on your turn is pretty much always at least 6k because you can always attach like 1 Rested Dawn onto your character for free, and that just lets you swing for 6k and get cards out of their hand really early. We also had 2 Doflamingo placements, which is super exciting for me personally because I love Doflamingo. both of them were running like the Treasure Cup Jinbeis, which are sitting at like $80 right now. So it's a little bit expensive to play, to be honest. But I mean, this deck is really good. Like, because there's less and less 8-cost kid running around, we're going to see the winning lists actually don't run any 8-cost kid. It's actually easier for you to play against green because, you know, even if they're swinging at your board, you could always kind of rebuild your board to swing out. And if they're spending their turns trying to kind of destroy your board while you're just like recurring your cards with Gecko Moria and you're swinging and getting out your warlords for free, it's actually really difficult for green players to catch up to that. So what ends up happening is they have to just rely on the Odin and hope the Odin is enough, because they can't even play 7-cost Eustace Kid, right? Because it's just going to get Mihawked in the end. And then also we had 2 Ivankov placements. It honestly doesn't surprise me too much that there was low placements for this deck, because although it's really, really good, you know, you could just like cycle all of your 7-cost Ivankovs and just cycle forever, just drop a bunch of threats on board. It's one of the harder decks to pilot in this meta. And if you're playing 9 rounds of Swiss, and if you're playing in multiple tournaments, like, you don't want to be thinking that hard, right? It's way easier to just like play Zoro or like play Whitebeard, where you can just like kind of swing out and rush your opponent, get breaks in between your rounds and everything like that. So Ivankov is kind of even harder to play within like this regionals format. And then of course we had the Kaido players. It's pretty much the same deck it is in OP1. It's just a little bit more consistent, right? Because now you have the Impel Down cards. You also have Hannibal, which is a turn 1 play for Kaido. Just really good. And Hannibal will search you out like, you know, Domino, which is a blocker. It'll search you out those Hell's Judgments to live in the early game against Zoro, which is awesome. And then it even searches out stuff like Shiryu if you're running it, you know. So there's a lot of instances where, you know, Kaido is actually a little bit stronger than it was in OP1. But it's always about that Onigashima, right? It's a little bit more difficult to top, especially when it's 9 rounds of Swiss and it's 1 round. If you don't see Onigashima and you end up losing 1 game, it's going to be very difficult to kind of climb your way back to the top. Now moving on to our unique leaders, we have Kid, which is represented by my boy Rob at Locals. And this deck is awesome. I mean, I'm actually very surprised that more Kid players didn't top, because it's pretty much just like Kinemon, but I think it has a little bit better matchup into Smoker, since you can just rely on that double swing attack. And also, I mean, it's just great for closing games, right? You don't have the kind of game-breaking cheating effects that can happen with, and when I say cheating, I just mean like Kinemon effect to kind of cheat things out early. But you still have the consistency of green, and if you're running into a lot of Zoro, you're still going to have all of the positives with green, plus the positive of, you know, getting that double swing. It's a little bit better into Whitebeard, you know, since if Kinemon doesn't have a board to swing with, if they don't have the Odin, it could be very difficult to take the game back from a Whitebeard player. But, you know, for a Kid player, like, you just rest whatever blocker they have, double swing, and it's all good. But yeah, only 1 Kid player out of all the regional tournaments. And again, congratulations to my boy Rob. You definitely deserve it. And then moving on to Z, honestly, one of the better control decks in the format, other than like Kinemon. I think the only reason why we don't see this deck more often is because of how much Zoro there is. Because Zoro is kind of just running rampant throughout these tournaments, Z cannot really find its footing. If we're ever in a meta that's more similar to like OP1, where we see like a lot of Eustace Kid or a lot of green over Zoro, which I don't think is going to happen in OP2 because Zoro is just too strong. But if we're ever in a meta like that, I think Z can actually like have a good fighting chance to get more top placements, just because into things like Kinemon and Whitebeard, you could actually take the board really easily, especially against Whitebeard, because, you know, a lot of their cards are vanillas. They do run the rush cards though that you need to be careful of, but for the most part, a lot of stuff isn't sticking on the board against Z, especially when that 10-cost Kuzan is out. So if we're ever in a different meta, maybe Z can come into like kind of wreck shop. But as it stands right now, there's just too much Zoro running around for this to see a lot of top placements. And then of course we have that one Magellan list. It is such a cool deck, you guys. I'm going to be covering this in the future. It's pretty much a mid-range, like kind of aggro Magellan list, which makes sense because Magellan Leader is just getting plus 1000 every time you go Dawn minus. So you're actually able to like swing very, very aggressively. And it's just such a cool deck to see. I will be covering like all of the kind of non-meta decks or like the roguish decks in the future. I just wanted to get like all of the meta decks out there first before regionals. But now regional season is kind of calming down, so we could talk about, you know, the more fun rogue decks that are going to be coming out, and then we'll ramp up for that Treasure Cup season coming up in May. But with that being said, let's get into, you know, what won every tournament and what their deck lists look like. So I'm sorry if I mispronounce any people's names, but our Carta Magica winner is Justin Hendershot with his Zoro list, and it looks like a pretty standard list. Like, you're running all of your one-cost support cards, you're running the Magras, the Makinos to pump up those Namis and Sunnykons, the Dodons to search everything out, but also giving up like one of each of, you know, the Robin and the Whitebeard to run that 5-cost Luffy. You know, that's something that I've kind of seen the meta shift towards to. A lot of people like were not playing the 5-cost Luffy anymore at the start of the meta, but I'm starting to see like a little bit of a shift because of how many blockers there are. And it's kind of an interesting situation, right? Because the deck list is already pretty tight. And yes, you can run 3 Whitebeard, but a lot of people say that the 4 Whitebeard is kind of needed, especially in the Zoro mirror matches, where it's kind of whoever lands the most like Whitebeards, right, it wins the game, or whoever lands the most removal wins the game. But Whitebeard definitely is a great situation for that. And, you know, Red Luffy isn't really going to help you in that scenario in the mirror match because Red doesn't really run blockers anymore, but it's going to help you in a lot of the other matches, like into green, especially Black is amazing into, and it's just going to help you push for those games. And then our next 2 lists are going to be both Kinemon lists. They are very, very similar. This is going to be Jonathan Marr's list from Talk Games. And we see something very interesting here. I mean, no 8-cost Kid, which makes a lot of sense because with the addition of Curly Dodon and Gordon being ran at like 4, you know, that 8-cost Kid, it's not as polarizing as it once was, right? There's also the Black matchup that you have to worry about. Black will just pop 8-cost Kid, and you got no value out of it. So they opt to run kind of this some ratio of 6 for the 7-cost Kid and the 8-cost Odin. Like, this deck list runs 3-3. The Quan Lee's deck list that we're going to look at after this one runs 2-4. And it's just, you know, what you like and what matchups that you want an advantage in, right? Because 7-drop Kid is definitely better into the mirror match than it is anything else. And Odin is kind of just, in general, better into every matchup. And this deck actually runs a pretty heavy event list that we've seen, you know, running 4 events. 1 for the Paradise Waterfall, getting that combo in with the 7-cost Kid is amazing. And then Punk Gibson for our other counter event. And I think Punk Gibson is great. Like, it helps you with your Whitebeard matchup, helps you in a lot of other matchups like the Mirror, because it's able to just like rest a card and protect something that you could then swing into. It's just an all-around great list. And, you know, they're even running the Toki blockers, so you could just put Toki up along with Odin and Yamato, and then also she's a 1k counter, which is amazing. And it's just a really solid, really consistent list all around. And then, of course, we have our Pro Play Games winner, Quan Lee, also playing Kinemon. And if you compare these 2 deck lists, they're actually very, very similar, right? The only difference is the ratios between cards. And also, Quan Lee likes to run the 5-cost Trafalgar Law, which I honestly agree with. I think running the 5-cost Law can be very clutch in a lot of situations. This is also a card that kind of helps you with your Whitebeard matchup. And even your Zoro matchup, right? Because a lot of the time it could be kind of difficult to take games as green because Zoro players will just put you on a clock, right? Because they'll play the 9-cost Whitebeard and all of your blockers are below 3k. So you actually cannot block a lot of the time. But having that extra law there, being able to just like scoop up cards, play something aggressive like an Okiku or a Raizo based off of like what you need, and having that big blocker actually helps a lot. But yeah, the most interesting thing I think out of these two lists is that there is 8 cost Kid, which is like something that, was very taboo in OP1. It's just not the card that it used to be in this meta, which I find very interesting. And then speaking of similar lists, our last two winners for both Top Cut events were actually Whitebeard. And Top Cut, for some reason, just had a bunch of Whitebeard representation in general. Top 64 was flooded with Whitebeard, and they were pretty much all Strawbeard variants, which is I find super interesting. And that's not something I really expected to come out from this meta, but here we are. And it's just really cool, right? Because this deck is super consistent. I mean, Nami searches pretty much every threat that you need and is so flexible. Like, you like seeing her in the early game as an early play, but you also like seeing her late game, right? Because maybe you need that rush Luffy to finish the game. Maybe you just want like a guard point or a radical beam to survive the next oncoming turns. Maybe you just need like a 2K, right? Because all of your 2Ks, besides Makino, are Straw Hat type characters, right? And then also with addition of the Makino, maybe you swing with the Nami for game. It's just such a flexible and consistent deck. You're drawing a lot of cards from your life. You're also, instead of this deck is also a little bit more consistent than like the Moby Dick version, because you're not relying on drawing the stage card, and also because you're not relying on the stage card and dropping down to 1 life, you can afford to kind of take it slower and like counter out of more attacks from your opponent, because then if you can drop the 9-cost Whitebeard, and it throws your opponent's game completely for a loop, right? Because especially for like matchups like Kinemon, where Kinemon players, they're not going to swing at your life that often because they want to control your board, right? And then drop an Odin and just get all of your cards down. But if they are not expecting you to drop this 9-cost Whitebeard, it could really throw them for a loop. They'll be clearing your board, trying their best to kind of maintain that board state, waiting for you to lose life every turn, and then all of a sudden you drop this 9-cost and their game plan is completely shifted because you're at like 1 life or you're at 2 life, and now you're pumped all the way up to 8k, which is a hard number to swing for, and you have an extra like 10k Whitebeard on the board. It's just an awesome, like amazing way to play this game, and I think it's just not surprising at all that this took like the number 1 spot from Zoro, especially considering how Zoro plays. And then of course we have Ryan Baker's winning Whitebeard list that won the day after, and this is an interesting deck, honestly. Like, you're running pretty much all of the Strawbeard type cards, right? But something different about this is you're also running the big vanillas from the Whitebeard archetype, like the Moby Dick version archetype. And you might ask yourself, why are they doing this, right? Why are you running Atmos why are you running like less of the Straw Hat characters that could be searched? And why are you running Atmos? Why are you running Kingdu? And it's all because of that 2 Marco blocker, honestly. So you are sacrificing a little bit of consistency, especially in your vanillas, right? You're still obviously going to draw into your vanillas, but it's just now you have the option to play Marco as a defensive play, which, the Strawbeard version does not have the luxury to. And Marco is just one of the most annoying cards to deal with, right? Because it is a blocker that is sticking onto the field most likely. The only way to really get rid of it cleanly is by spinning it to the bottom of the deck, bouncing it away, or just resting it and then swinging at your opponent or the Whitebeard player. But they're running a lot of the same tools here. You still have the 9-cost, you still have the Rush Luffys, the Rush Aces. No guard point this time, but I think that's because, you have the Marcos for that added kind of bonus defense, which is awesome. And then also you have access to Jozu, which I think is pretty interesting. It's just like an extra kind of lower committal rush card that you're probably going to keep in your hand as a 2K. And then, in those end game scenarios, like it might clutch up a game for you, right? But honestly, 2 different takes on Whitebeard. It's just really interesting seeing all of these decks come out. But let me know what you guys think. Does this look like what you expected? Are there decks that like kind of surprised you? I know I've been saying it, but like I just think it's so cool that Whitebeard kind of swept away like all of the placements for the top cuts where everyone thought it was just going to be Zoro. So that's going to be the end of this video today, guys. But as always, thank you so much for watching and thank you for your support. Like, we are almost at 1,000 subs. So if you could just like, comment, and subscribe to my channel, that'd be awesome. 1,000 subs is not something that I expected to happen when I made this channel with my friends. And it's just really cool to see all of the support and like you guys find value in this content. Also, if you guys are going to the Arlington offline regional, we are planning on going. I'm going to do some awesome like regional vlogs for you guys, kind of document my tournament experience if we do end up getting those placements for it. So look forward to that and look forward to the next videos to come. As always, you know, whatever you're doing, whether it's like school or work or whatever you're doing in your life, good luck in it. I hope you guys are having a great day and I'll see you guys on the next one.